She is pure emotion. He is all about control. Put them in the same office, add sarcasm, emotional breakdowns, and a spark of romance, and what you get is a story that will make you laugh, swoon, and fall in love. Charlotte Price had always believed she was the kind of woman who kept her composure under pressure, the kind who smiled through storms and turned lemons into award-winning advertising campaigns. That belief shattered spectacularly on a Tuesday afternoon, in front of 17 executives, a malfunctioning projector, and a cheese platter that somehow ended up on the floor. The nervous breakdown, as her therapist would later call it, was actually quite impressive in its theatrical execution. First came the tears, silent at first, then increasingly dramatic. Then the rambling about how the campaign for organic dog food had consumed her soul. And finally, the pièce de résistance, throwing her laser pointer across the room while declaring that capitalism was a hamster wheel designed by sadists. 3 weeks later, Charlotte sat in her tiny London flat, surrounded by empty teacups and rejection emails, wondering how a woman with a first-class degree from Cambridge had ended up crying into her cereal at 2 in the afternoon. "For you need help," her best friend Beatrice had said, with all the subtlety of a woman who had read too many self-help books disguised as romance novels. Professional help, or at least a support group. Something free, because let's be honest, darling, you can barely afford that cereal you're drowning in tears. That was how Charlotte found herself scrolling through support groups at midnight, her laptop balanced precariously on a stack of unpaid bills. Most were too expensive, too far, or too intense. She didn't need to discuss childhood trauma with strangers. She just needed someone to tell her she wasn't completely insane for having a public meltdown over dog food. Then she found it. Starting Over, a group for processing loss and frustration. Perfect. The meeting was held in the basement of a community centre in Kensington that smelled faintly of old books and desperation. Charlotte arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a lukewarm coffee like a shield, and immediately regretted every decision that had led her to this moment. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. The room was arranged in a circle of mismatched chairs. A handwritten sign on the wall read, "Healing happens here," in letters that were either artistic or written by someone having a minor stroke. The facilitator, a man named Gerald, who appeared to be in his 50s, wore a flowing linen tunic and had the serene expression of someone who had either achieved enlightenment or consumed an impressive amount of herbal supplements. "Welcome, welcome," Gerald said, promptly knocking over his water bottle while gesturing expansively. "We're all here to embrace our journeys, to hold space for our pain, and to remember that love is like a raccoon in an inflatable pool." Charlotte blinked. The metaphor made absolutely no sense, but several people nodded as if Gerald had just revealed the secrets of the universe. As the room filled, she noticed something peculiar. Everyone seemed to be discussing weddings, venues, dresses, cake flavors. The word altar came up with alarming frequency. A cold realization crept up her spine. She grabbed the crumpled flyer from her bag and read it properly for the first time. Starting Over. A group for those left at the altar. Oh no. Before she could execute a tactical retreat, Gerald clapped his hands together, spilling more water in the process, and announced that they would begin. "Let us welcome our newcomers," he said warmly. "Please, share what brings you to our circle of healing." Charlotte's eyes darted to the door. Too far. Too obvious. She was trapped. That was when she noticed him. He sat directly across from her, arms crossed over a chest that seemed specifically designed to strain the limits of his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His jaw could have been carved from marble. His dark hair was swept back with effortless precision, and his eyes, God, his eyes, held the kind of intensity that made her forget how to breathe properly. He was also radiating annoyance, like a small, beautiful sun of irritation. Beside him, a woman in her late 20s with perfectly styled blonde hair was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while simultaneously checking her phone. "The universe has a plan," she was saying to no one in particular. "My chakras told me this morning that today would be transformative." The man, her brother Charlotte guessed from the similar bone structure and shared expression of aristocratic boredom, Looked like he would rather be literally anywhere else on Earth. "Lorenzo, show some respect," the woman hissed when he sighed audibly. Lorenzo. The name suited him, Charlotte thought. Strong, Italian, probably attached to a man who had never experienced a single moment of self-doubt in his entire privileged existence. Gerald's voice pulled her back to reality. "Charlotte, dear, would you like to share your story?" Every eye in the room turned to her, including those devastating dark ones across the circle. She swallowed hard. She couldn't admit she was in the wrong group. That would be humiliating. And technically she had experienced a kind of loss, a professional loss, a devastating, soul-crushing professional loss. I'm here because of a traumatic separation," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "A corporate divorce, really. The betrayal was profound." She was warming to her subject now, the advertising professional in her finding the narrative thread. "We had built something together, my work and I. Years of dedication, of passion, of late nights and early mornings. And then one day it was just over. A professional betrayal of the highest order." She was rather proud of herself, actually. It was poetic, dignified, completely believable. And then Lorenzo laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, rich, infuriatingly sarcastic laugh that echoed off the basement walls and made every head swivel toward him in horror. "Lorenzo!" his sister gasped. Gerald dropped his water bottle again, and Charlotte felt her face flush crimson as the most attractive man she had ever seen laughed at her pain. This was going to be a disaster. The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of humiliation and barely suppressed rage. Charlotte kept her eyes fixed on her shoes, sensible ballet flats that had seen better days, while the others shared genuinely heartbreaking stories of being abandoned at altars, in churches, in exotic destination venues. Meanwhile, Lorenzo had the audacity to look bored. His sister, Sophia, cried intermittently while quoting what appeared to be an Instagram account dedicated to spiritual awakening. "The pain is just love with nowhere to go," she sniffled. "That's what my meditation app said this morning." Gerald nodded sagely, knocked over his third water bottle of the evening, and offered a metaphor about hearts being like overripe avocados, bruised but still full of good stuff. Charlotte wanted to dissolve into the floor. When Gerald finally announced that the session was complete, "Remember, healing is not linear. It's more like a drunken butterfly." She grabbed her bag and fled toward the exit with the urgency of a woman escaping a fire. The evening air hit her face like a blessing. She took a deep breath, counted to 10, and decided she would never, ever Google support groups at midnight again. "Running away?" The voice came from behind her, low and rich with amusement. Charlotte's spine stiffened. She turned slowly, already composing the devastating response she would deliver to this arrogant, laughing, impossibly handsome nightmare of a man. Lorenzo leaned against a sleek black car that probably cost more than her annual salary. Her former annual salary, she corrected bitterly. His arms were crossed, his expression hovering somewhere between apologetic and entertained. "I'm not running," Charlotte said coolly. "I'm walking with purpose. There's a difference." "My mistake." His lips quirked upward. "Look, I wanted to apologize for the performance in there. That was rude." "Yes, it was. But you have to admit—" He pushed off from the car, taking a step closer. "It was a little bit funny." "No?" Charlotte clutched her bag tighter. "It absolutely was not. Corporate divorce? Professional betrayal?" His eyebrows rose. "You walked into a support group for people abandoned at the altar and described getting fired like it was a Nicholas Sparks novel." Charlotte's face burned. "How did you—" "You mentioned your boss 6 times, and deadlines, and a campaign for organic dog food." He was definitely smiling now, that infuriating half-smile that probably made lesser women swoon. "No one who's been left at the altar talks about dog food, trust me. I've heard enough stories tonight to last several lifetimes." She wanted to be angry. She was angry. But something about the way he was looking at her, with genuine amusement rather than cruelty, made her defenses waver. "Fine," she admitted. "I may have misread the flyer." "May have?" "Did. I did misread the flyer." She exhaled sharply. "I thought it was for general life disappointments, not specifically for people whose fiancés developed cold feet." Lorenzo nodded, something shifting in his expression. "Well, for what it's worth, Your delivery was excellent. Very committed. Gerald was completely fooled. Gerald thinks love is like a raccoon in a pool. Gerald thinks a lot of things. Lorenzo's smile flickered into something almost genuine. He's been my sister's therapist for 3 months. I'm fairly certain he's making up the metaphors as he goes. Charlotte found herself fighting a smile of her own. The drunken butterfly was a nice touch. Personal favorite. They stood in silence for a moment, the London evening settling around them like a soft grey blanket. Charlotte became acutely aware of how close he was standing, of the subtle scent of his cologne, something warm and expensive that made her think of fireplaces and leather-bound books. She shook herself mentally. This man had laughed at her, in public. She was not going to be charmed by his jawline and his fancy cologne. "Well," she said briskly, "thank you for the apology. Sort of. I should go." "Wait." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card, extending it toward her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Take this." Charlotte stared at the card like it might explode. "Why?" "Because someone with your creativity—" He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Even if it's slightly unstable, could be useful. My family runs a hotel group. We're looking for someone to refresh our brand image. The current campaign is frankly embarrassing." "You're offering me a job?" Charlotte laughed incredulously. "You don't even know me. I know you walked into the wrong support group and improvised a completely believable cover story on the spot. That's exactly the kind of creative thinking we need." He pressed the card into her hand, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Think about it. When you're ready to stop crying into your cereal." Before she could ask how he knew about the cereal, had her despair really been that obvious? He was walking back toward his sister, who was hugging Gerald goodbye with the enthusiasm of someone who had found her spiritual guru. Charlotte looked down at the card. Heavy cardstock, elegant font. Lorenzo Ashford, CEO, Ashford International Hotels. She almost dropped it. Ashford Hotels, the Ashford Hotels. The luxury chain that had properties in 30 countries and a reputation for impeccable service. The family was practically royalty in the hospitality world, and their CEO had just offered her a job in a community center parking lot. 4 days later, after her landlord's increasingly aggressive emails and a deeply uncomfortable conversation with Mrs. Chen, the building's receptionist who seemed to know exactly how many bills Charlotte had stuffed under her mattress, she found herself staring at the card again. "Just call," Beatrice urged over the phone. "What's the worst that could happen? I could humiliate myself further. You cried over dog food in front of 17 executives, Charlotte. The bar for humiliation is already underground." Fair point. She dialed the number before she could lose her nerve. He answered on the second ring as if he had been waiting. "Took you long enough," Lorenzo said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. This was either the best decision of her life or the beginning of a beautiful disaster. Probably both. Charlotte's first day at Ashford International Hotels began with a coffee disaster and ended with her questioning every life choice that had led her to this moment. The headquarters occupied a gleaming glass tower in Mayfair, the kind of building that whispered old money and screamed intimidation. Charlotte had changed outfits 4 times that morning, finally settling on a cream silk blouse and tailored burgundy trousers that made her feel almost professional. Almost. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like ascending to her own execution. "You must be the new creative consultant." The voice came from a woman stationed behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier. She was perhaps 45, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her expression suggested she had seen empires rise and fall and found both equally tedious. "I'm Margaret Chen, Mr. Ashford's executive assistant." She looked Charlotte up and down with the efficiency of someone cataloguing inventory. "You're early." "He hates that almost as much as he hates lateness." "What time would he prefer?" "Exactly on time, which is impossible to achieve, so he's perpetually annoyed." Margaret's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Welcome to Ashford Hotels." Before Charlotte could respond, Lorenzo emerged from a corner office that had floor-to-ceiling windows and probably cost more in monthly rent than Charlotte's entire building. He was on the phone speaking in rapid Italian that she couldn't understand, but somehow found unfairly attractive. He wore a navy suit today, perfectly tailored, with a white shirt open at the collar. No tie. Charlotte found herself staring at the hollow of his throat and immediately looked away. "You're here," he said, ending his call without ceremony. "Good. We have a presentation in 40 minutes, and the current campaign materials are a catastrophe." "Good morning to you too," Charlotte muttered. Lorenzo's eyebrow rose. "I don't do pleasantries before noon. Margaret, did you—" "Coffee is on your desk. The Berlin contracts need your signature, and your sister called 3 times. Margaret didn't look up from her computer. "She wants to know if you've opened your heart chakra yet. Tell her my chakras are none of her business. I told her that 20 minutes ago. She said she's bringing crystals to the office tomorrow." Lorenzo pinched the bridge of his nose. Charlotte bit her lip to keep from laughing. "Miss Price?" He turned those intense dark eyes on her, and suddenly she forgot how to breathe. "My office, now." She followed him into the corner office, acutely aware of Margaret's gaze on her back. The space was immaculate. Sleek furniture, minimal decoration, everything arranged with military precision. The only personal touch was a single photograph on the desk, Lorenzo and Sophia as children, laughing at something outside the frame. "Sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I'm going to show you what we're working with, and I need you to be brutally honest." "I'm always honest." "Good, because the agency we've been using has been taking our money and delivering garbage for 18 months. He pulled up a presentation on the large screen mounted on the wall. "This is their latest concept for our rebranding." Charlotte watched in growing horror as generic stock images of smiling families flashed across the screen, accompanied by taglines like "Ashford Hotels, where memories are made," and "Experience the Ashford difference." "That's terrible, you can say it. It's like they put luxury hotel clichés into a computer and pressed blend." She stood, moving closer to the screen. "There's no personality, no story. This could be any hotel chain in the world." "Exactly." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "So what would you do differently?" Charlotte's mind was already racing, ideas sparking like fireworks. "Ashford hotels aren't just places to stay, they're experiences. Each property has its own character, its own history. You've got a converted monastery in Tuscany, a restored Art Deco building in Miami, a castle in Scotland." She turned to face him, her excitement building. The campaign should celebrate that individuality, make each hotel feel like a discovery, not just a destination. She was pacing now, gesturing wildly in a way that probably looked unhinged. "And the language needs to change completely. Not where memories are made, that's passive. People don't want to be told what to feel. They want to feel invited into something exclusive, something special." When she finally stopped talking, slightly breathless, Lorenzo was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing." He cleared his throat. "That was adequate." "Adequate? I don't give compliments before noon either." From the doorway, Margaret's voice floated in. "He means he's impressed. I've worked for him for 12 years. That was practically a standing ovation." Lorenzo shot his assistant a look that could have frozen lava. Margaret remained completely unbothered. The presentation that afternoon was a disaster in the best possible way. Charlotte hijacked the meeting from the existing agency, improvising a pitch that left the executives leaning forward in their seats, and the agency representatives looking like they'd swallowed something unpleasant. Afterward, Lorenzo cornered her in the hallway. "That was reckless," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "It worked. That's not the point. You didn't follow the plan. You didn't have a plan. You had a funeral procession for a dying campaign." Charlotte lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated by his proximity, by the way his cologne was doing strange things to her concentration. "You hired me for my creativity. This is what creativity looks like. It's messy and spontaneous, and sometimes it involves ambushing people in conference rooms." Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the part of him that craved control battling against something else entirely. "Fine," he said finally, "but next time warn me before you stage a coup." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her heart racing for reasons she refused to examine. This job was going to be complicated. "He cornered you in a hallway." Beatrice's voice reached a pitch that made Charlotte's phone speaker crackle. "Charlotte, do you understand what this means?" That my new boss has boundary issues? It means you're living in a romance novel. There was a sound of something being knocked over on Beatrice's end, probably one of the 17 stacks of books that occupied every surface of her flat. The brooding billionaire, the creative underdog, the workplace tension. This is literally the plot of every enemies to lovers story ever written. Charlotte sank deeper into her sofa, cradling a glass of wine that she desperately needed after her first week at Ashford Hotels. We're not enemies. We're professional adversaries with occasional moments of mutual respect. That's exactly what Elizabeth Bennet would have said about Mr. Darcy. Beatrice, I love you, but you need to stop comparing my life to 19th century literature. I'm a literature professor. It's literally my job to find parallels everywhere. There was a dreamy sigh. Has he done the thing yet? Where he looks at you like he's trying to memorize your face? Charlotte thought about the way Lorenzo had stared at her during the presentation, his dark eyes following her movements with an intensity that had made her lose her train of thought mid-sentence. No, she lied. Liar. I can hear you blushing through the phone. Before Charlotte could defend herself, there was a sharp knock at her door. She froze. Charlotte, Mrs. Chen's voice carried through the thin wood. I saw you come in. Are you busy? Oh, God, Charlotte whispered. The building receptionist is here. The nosy one who knows everyone's business? She's the only one. Charlotte dragged herself off the sofa. I'll call you back. She opened the door to find Mrs. Chen holding a plate of homemade biscuits and wearing an expression of barely contained curiosity. I brought treats, Mrs. Chen announced, pushing past Charlotte into the flat with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word boundary. So, I heard you got a new job at a fancy company, and that a very expensive car has been dropping you home. It's a company car, for work purposes. Mrs. Chen's eyes swept the flat, like a detective cataloguing evidence. And the driver? The tall one with the shoulders? My boss, strictly professional. He walked you to the door last Tuesday. He was being polite. He watched you go inside. For a long time. Mrs. Chen set down the biscuits with a knowing smile. My friend Doris. She works at the building across the street. She saw the whole thing. Very romantic, she said. Charlotte wondered if it was possible to die from embarrassment. Meanwhile, across London, in a private members' club that required 3 references and a soul to join, Lorenzo was having an entirely different conversation. You're doing what? Marcus Drake stared at his best friend, like he'd announced plans to join a circus. You hired a woman you met at your sister's therapy group? The one you laughed at? It wasn't therapy. It was a support group. And she's talented. Lorenzo swirled his whiskey, avoiding Marcus's incredulous gaze. Her ideas for the rebrand are excellent. I'm sure they are. Marcus leaned forward, his expression shifting from disbelief to genuine concern. Lorenzo, mate, I've known you for 15 years. You've never hired anyone based on a parking lot conversation. What's really going on? Lorenzo considered lying. He was excellent at lying. It was practically a job requirement in his world, but Marcus had been there through the worst of it. The pressure from his father, the weight of running an empire, the endless parade of women who saw his bank balance before they saw him. I don't know, he admitted finally. There's something about her. She's completely wrong for our world. Disorganized, emotional, says whatever she's thinking without any filter. So everything you hate. Yes. Lorenzo set down his glass harder than necessary. And I can't stop thinking about her. Marcus groaned, running a hand through his hair. This is a disaster. You realize that, right? I went down this road, remember? Met someone who seemed different, thought I'd found something real, and then... He gestured vaguely. Divorce, lawyers, half my wine collection gone. Charlotte isn't like that. They never are, at first. Marcus flagged down a waiter for another drink. Look, I'm not saying don't have fun, but you need to be careful. You're the CEO of an international company. She's a creative consultant who had a mental breakdown over dog food. The power dynamics alone... She had a breakdown over being overworked and undervalued. There's a difference. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're defending her. You never defend anyone. Lorenzo said nothing. Because Marcus was right, he didn't. He had spent 34 years building walls so high that even his own family couldn't scale them. And yet somehow in the span of a week, Charlotte Price had found cracks he didn't know existed. It was terrifying. It was also, he was beginning to realize, entirely out of his control. The following Monday, Charlotte arrived at the office to find her desk covered in crystals. Sophia stopped by, Margaret explained, not looking up from her computer. She said these would help align your creative energy with the universe's frequency. I didn't ask follow-up questions. Charlotte picked up a purple stone that was apparently meant to enhance intuition. Is she always like this? Since the almost wedding, yes. Before that, she was merely eccentric. Margaret finally looked up, something almost like warmth in her expression. She means well, they both do in their own damaged ways. Both? Margaret's gaze flickered toward Lorenzo's closed office door. Mr. Ashford doesn't let people in easily. The fact that you're still here after a week is significant. Before Charlotte could ask what that meant, the door swung open and Lorenzo emerged, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was slightly disheveled, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that Charlotte absolutely did not notice. "We have a problem," he announced. "The Tuscany property needs an emergency rebrand. We're flying out Thursday." "We?" Charlotte squeaked. "You're the creative consultant. I need creative consultation." His eyes met hers, and something electric passed between them. "Packlight. We'll be there a week." He disappeared back into his office before she could respond. Margaret's knowing smile was the last thing Charlotte saw before she retreated to her desk to have a quiet crisis among Sophia's crystals. A week in Tuscany, with Lorenzo Ashford in a romantic Italian hotel. What could possibly go wrong? The Ashford Tuscany property was a converted 16th-century monastery nestled in the hills above Florence, surrounded by olive groves and vineyards that stretched toward the horizon like a Renaissance painting come to life. Charlotte pressed her face against the car window like a child, completely abandoning any pretense of professional composure. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's underperforming," Lorenzo replied, not looking up from his phone. "Revenue is down 12%. Guest satisfaction scores are dropping, and the online reviews mention faded charm more often than luxury experience. You really know how to ruin a moment." He glanced up then, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The sunset view from the west terrace is better. I'll show you later." Before Charlotte could process what sounded suspiciously like a personal invitation, the car rolled to a stop in front of the hotel's ancient stone entrance. A man burst through the doors with the dramatic flair of an opera tenor making his final bow. "Signor Ashford, you have returned." Giuseppe Benedetti, the hotel's general manager, was 60 years old with silver hair, expressive hands, and the kind of passionate intensity that suggested he felt every emotion at maximum volume. He embraced Lorenzo with enthusiasm that the younger man clearly found uncomfortable. "And you have brought a beautiful woman. This is wonderful. This is fate." "This is my creative consultant," Lorenzo said stiffly, extracting himself from Giuseppe's grip. "Miss Price is here to work on the rebranding." Giuseppe turned his attention to Charlotte, clasping her hands in both of his. His eyes were suspiciously moist. "Signorina, welcome to our humble monastery. My beloved wife Rosa. May she rest in eternal peace. She would have loved you. She always said this place needed a woman's touch." Charlotte noticed the small shrine in the lobby corner. A photograph of a beautiful dark-haired woman surrounded by candles and fresh flowers. Giuseppe caught her looking. 32 years we were married," he said softly. "She passed 3 years ago, but her spirit, it lives in these walls. She speaks to me sometimes, through the wind in the olive trees." He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. "Forgive me, I am emotional, man." That's lovely," Charlotte managed, genuinely moved. Lorenzo looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Giuseppe, the rooms—" Yes, I have prepared the finest suites." Giuseppe clapped his hands, instantly recovering his theatrical energy. "The Medici suite for you, Signor Ashford, and for the beautiful Signorina, the Botticelli suite. They are connected by a private terrace." He winked unsubtly. "Very romantic, no?" "Very professional," Lorenzo corrected through gritted teeth. "We're here for work." Of course. Work." Giuseppe nodded sagely, clearly not believing a word. "I will have dinner prepared for 8 o'clock. The chef has made his specialty, tagliatelle with wild boar ragout, Rosa's favorite recipe she taught him herself." As Giuseppe led them through vaulted corridors, lined with Renaissance frescoes, Charlotte found herself walking beside Lorenzo in an increasingly awkward silence. Every time their arms accidentally brushed, she felt electricity shoot through her entire body. "Is he always like this?" she whispered. "He's gotten worse since Rosa died. He sees romance everywhere." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "He once tried to set me up with a food critic because she had kind eyes." "Did it work?" She was 73 and married to a count. Charlotte laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, bright and unguarded. Lorenzo looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite identify, something between surprise and wonder. "You should do that more often," he said quietly. "Laugh at your misfortune? Just laugh." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged, until Giuseppe's voice shattered it completely. "Here we are, the Botticelli suite." He threw open the doors to reveal a room that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Frescoed ceilings, antique furniture, enormous windows overlooking the valley, and dominating one wall, a massive painting of Venus rising from the sea. "It's incredible," Charlotte said, momentarily forgetting to breathe. "The original hangs in the Uffizi, of course," Giuseppe explained. "But this copy was commissioned in 1847. Rosa always said it was more beautiful than the original because it has—" He pressed his hand to his heart. "Soul." Lorenzo checked his watch pointedly. "We should get settled." "Dinner at 8, you said?" Si. "And afterward, perhaps a walk in the olive grove. The moonlight there is very special. Rosa and I—" He trailed off, eyes glistening again. "Well, I will leave you to rest." Once Giuseppe had departed, with several backward glances and knowing smiles, Charlotte found herself alone with Lorenzo on the shared terrace. The setting sun painted the Tuscan hills in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance church bells were ringing. "He's going to be insufferable all week," Lorenzo said, but there was no real irritation in his voice. "He's sweet. He misses his wife. He's projecting his romantic fantasies onto everyone he meets." Lorenzo turned to face her, the golden light catching the angles of his face. "You should know people are going to talk about us being here together. Let them talk." Charlotte lifted her chin. "I know why I'm here. Do you?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. "I thought I did. And now?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, close enough that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, could smell that intoxicating cologne that had been haunting her dreams for weeks. "Now," he said slowly, "I'm not sure of anything." Charlotte's heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "That doesn't sound like the Lorenzo Ashford I know, the man who has everything under control." "You're right." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "It doesn't." For one breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, his body swaying almost imperceptibly toward hers. The air between them felt thick enough to touch. Then his phone rang. Lorenzo stepped back like he'd been burned, the spell shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I need to take this," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll see you at dinner." He was gone before she could respond, leaving Charlotte alone on the terrace with a racing heart and the distinct feeling that this week was going to change everything. In the olive grove below, the evening wind rustled through the silver leaves, and if Charlotte had been the type to believe in such things, she might have sworn she heard a woman's gentle laughter carried on the breeze. Dinner was served in a private dining room, with stone walls that had witnessed 5 centuries of secrets. Candles flickered in ancient iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across Lorenzo's face. As he sat across from Charlotte, a glass of Chianti in his hand, and an expression she couldn't quite read. Giuseppe had outdone himself. Course after course arrived, each one more exquisite than the last. Bruschetta with fresh tomatoes and basil, the promised tagliatelle with wild boar ragout, roasted vegetables from the hotel's garden. Every dish came with a story about Rosa, delivered with theatrical gestures and occasional tears. She would add just a touch of nutmeg, Giuseppe explained, presenting a creamy tiramisu. She said it was the secret ingredient. "I think the secret ingredient was love." He dabbed his eyes. "I will leave you to enjoy. Rosa would have wanted you to have privacy." He departed with a meaningful look at Lorenzo that was about as subtle as a fireworks display. "He's trying to set us up," Charlotte observed, taking a bite of the tiramisu and trying not to moan at how good it was. "He's been trying to set me up with someone for 3 years. You're the first one who's actually here." Lorenzo's eyes met hers over the candlelight. which probably means something. It means you needed a creative consultant. I could have hired anyone. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Charlotte reached for her wine, needing something to do with her hands. "Tell me something," she said, emboldened by the alcohol and the intimacy of the setting. "Why haven't you ever been in a serious relationship? And don't give me the 'I'm too busy with work' excuse. I've seen your schedule. Margaret has you taking calls at 6 in the morning. You could fit a relationship into that chaos if you wanted to." Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, swirling his wine in a way that seemed more meditative than pretentious. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its usual sardonic edge. "When I was 23, I dated someone, a woman from Milan. She was beautiful, charming, seemed completely genuine." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. 6 months in, I found out she was feeding information to a competitor. Stock tips, expansion plans, things I'd told her in confidence. She'd been paid to get close to me. Charlotte's heart clenched. "Lorenzo, that's horrible." "It was educational." He set down his glass. "After that, I learned to keep people at a distance. It's easier to control the outcome when you don't let anyone too close." "Control?" Charlotte shook her head. "You can't control love, that's the whole point. Which is exactly why I've avoided it. Until now?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Lorenzo's gaze sharpened, and for a moment she saw something raw and unguarded flash across his features. "Until now," he admitted quietly, "I thought I was doing a good job." Charlotte felt the weight of his confessions settle over her like a warm blanket. Here was this man, powerful, guarded, seemingly invincible, admitting that she had disrupted his carefully controlled world. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like responsibility. "I had a breakdown over dog food," she said softly, "in case you forgot." "You had a breakdown because you gave too much of yourself to people who didn't deserve it." Lorenzo leaned forward, his intensity almost overwhelming. "There's a difference between being broken and being overwhelmed. You're not broken, Charlotte. You're just learning where your limits are." She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "You barely know me. I know you walked into the wrong support group and turned it into a performance so convincing that Gerald still thinks you were engaged to a marketing executive named Brad." His lips curved slightly. "I know you ate lunch at your desk every day last week because you were too absorbed in the campaign to remember food. I know you hum when you're concentrating, and it's always songs from musicals, and you have terrible taste in music, but somehow it's endearing." Charlotte stared at him. "You noticed all that?" "I notice everything about you." He said it like a confession, like something he was ashamed of. "It's incredibly inconvenient." She laughed, a watery sound that was half sob. "I'm sorry for being inconvenient." "No, you're not." "No," she agreed. "I'm really not." They finished the tiramisu in comfortable silence, the tension between them shifting into something warmer, more complex. When Giuseppe appeared to clear the plates, weeping softly about how Rosa would have loved to see young love blooming, Lorenzo rolled his eyes, but didn't bother correcting him. They walked back to their suites through corridors lit by moonlight streaming through ancient windows. Charlotte was acutely aware of Lorenzo's presence beside her, of the way his hand occasionally brushed against hers as they walked. At her door, they stopped. The moment felt weighted with possibility, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering whether to jump. "Thank you," Charlotte said, "for dinner, for talking to me like a person and not just an employee." "You're welcome." Lorenzo's voice was rough. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his knuckles gently across her cheek. The touch was so tender, so at odds with his usual sharpness, that Charlotte forgot how to breathe. "You're making this very difficult," he murmured, his eyes fixed on her lips. "Making what difficult?" "Keeping my distance." His jaw tightened, some internal battle playing out behind his eyes. "You're absolutely destroying me, Charlotte Price, and I don't know what to do about it." She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the rapid pulse at his throat. Every instinct screamed at her to close the gap between them, to press her lips against his, and find out if he tasted like wine and confession. But something held her back. Some instinct that said this moment, beautiful as it was, wasn't the right one. They were standing at the beginning of something, and if she rushed it, she might lose it entirely. "Good night, Lorenzo," she whispered. He exhaled slowly, his hand dropping from her face. "Good night, Charlotte." She watched him walk to his own door, watched him pause with his hand on the handle. He didn't look back, but she saw his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. Then he was gone, and Charlotte was alone with a heart that felt too full for her chest and a certainty that nothing would ever be the same. In her suite, she stood at the window overlooking the moonlit olive grove and allowed herself to feel everything she'd been holding back. Hope, fear, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of falling in love with a man who was learning to fall right alongside her. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the night, and the ancient monastery held its breath. The days in Tuscany blurred together in a haze of work, wine, and moments that felt stolen from someone else's love story. Charlotte threw herself into the rebranding project with a fervor that surprised even herself, channeling all her confused emotions into creative genius. "What if we lean into the history?" she proposed during their third morning, spreading hand-drawn sketches across the breakfast table while Lorenzo pretended not to be impressed. Each Ashford property has a story. This monastery was home to monks who made wine and olive oil for 300 years. We could create an entire sensory experience around that heritage. Lorenzo studied her sketches, rough drawings of wine cellars, olive groves, ancient stone paths. "Go on." Guests wouldn't just stay here. They'd participate, harvest grapes, press olives, learn traditional recipes from local families. She was pacing now, the way she always did when ideas were flowing faster than she could contain them. "We're not selling rooms. We're selling transformation. People come as tourists and leave feeling like they've touched something eternal." Giuseppe, who had been hovering with increasing excitement, burst into applause. "Signorina, you understand. This is what Rosa always said. The monastery has a soul. You cannot put a soul in a brochure, but you can invite people to feel it." "Exactly," Charlotte beamed at him. "We need less polished marketing and more authentic invitation." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, watching her with an expression that made her stomach flip. "You're proposing we completely restructure how we market the property. New photography, new copy, new guest experiences. It would require significant investment. It would require vision." Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "Do you have vision, Mr. Ashford, or just spreadsheets?" Giuseppe gasped dramatically. Margaret, who had arrived the previous day to handle logistics, looked up from her laptop with what might have been admiration. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "Are you challenging me in my own hotel?" "Someone has to." The tension between them crackled like static electricity. Giuseppe fanned himself with a napkin and whispered loudly to Margaret, "This is better than my telenovelas." "I need more coffee for this," Margaret replied, but she was smiling. That afternoon, Lorenzo drove Charlotte to a nearby village to meet with local artisans who might partner with the hotel. The winding roads through the Tuscan countryside gave her ample opportunity to study his profile while pretending to admire the scenery. "You keep staring at me," he observed without taking his eyes off the road. "I'm admiring the landscape." "The landscape is on your right. I'm on your left." Charlotte felt her cheeks flush. "Maybe I find you more interesting than olive trees." Lorenzo's grip on the steering wheel tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a dangerous admission. I'm feeling reckless." He glanced at her then, just for a second, but the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "So am I. That's the problem." In the village, they met with a family who had been making ceramics for 6 generations. The matriarch, a tiny woman in her 80s named Lucia, took one look at Lorenzo and Charlotte together and announced in rapid Italian that they would make beautiful babies. "She's commenting on the weather," Lorenzo translated, his ears turning pink. "I speak some Italian," Charlotte informed him. She definitely wasn't talking about weather. Lucia cackled and pressed a hand-painted tile into Charlotte's hands, a design of intertwined olive branches. "For love," she said in heavily accented English, "you keep, brings luck." Charlotte tucked the tile carefully into her bag, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. The evenings became their secret time. After the work was done, and Giuseppe had retreated to his quarters to commune with Rosa's memory, Charlotte and Lorenzo would sit on the shared terrace with wine and conversation that grew more intimate with each passing night. She learned that he had taught himself to play piano as a teenager because he wanted something his father couldn't control, that he secretly loved terrible action movies, but told everyone he preferred foreign films, that he hadn't cried since he was 14 years old, when his mother had left the family for an artist she'd met in Paris. "She visits sometimes," he said one night, his voice carefully neutral. "Sends birthday cards with too much money and not enough words. Sophia forgave her years ago. I'm still working on it." Charlotte reached across the small table between them and covered his hand with hers. He stiffened at the contact, then slowly relaxed, turning his palm up to intertwine their fingers. "You don't have to forgive her," Charlotte said softly. "You just have to find a way to live with it. Is that what you did, with your breakdown? I'm still working on it too." She squeezed his hand. "But I'm getting better. Being here helps." "The monastery?" "You." The word hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying. Lorenzo looked at their joined hands for a long moment, his thumb tracing slow circles on her palm. "Charlotte." His voice was rough. "I don't know how to do this. Any of this. I've spent my entire adult life keeping people at arm's length, and you've somehow gotten closer in a few weeks than anyone has in years. It scares me." "It scares me too," she admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means it matters." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle, almost reverent. Charlotte's entire body felt like it was on fire. "We should go inside," he murmured against her skin, "before I do something I can't take back." "Would you want to take it back?" His eyes met hers, dark and hungry. "No, that's what terrifies me." They stood simultaneously, hands still clasped, the night air thick with possibility. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the gravitational pull between them that seemed to grow stronger every day. Lorenzo raised his free hand to cup her face, his touch impossibly gentle for a man so powerful. "One more day," he said. "Give me one more day to figure out how to do this right. You deserve more than some impulsive moment I haven't thought through. And if I don't want you to think it through?" He smiled, a real smile, rare and beautiful. "Then you'll have to be patient with me. I'm new at this." He kissed her forehead, lingering long enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, the barely restrained tension in his body. Then he stepped back, and the space between them felt like an ocean. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Lorenzo." She watched him disappear into his suite, then stood alone under the Tuscan stars, holding a hand-painted tile and wondering how she had fallen so completely for a man who was still learning how to fall. London greeted them with grey skies and a chaos that felt almost offensive after the golden tranquility of Tuscany. Charlotte stood in the arrivals hall at Heathrow, watching Lorenzo transform back into the controlled, guarded CEO she had first met. It was like watching armor reassemble piece by piece. "Margaret will send you the updated project timeline," he said, his voice brisk and professional. "We'll present the Tuscany rebrand to the board next month. I expect preliminary materials by Friday." "Of course, Mr. Ashford." His jaw tightened at the formal address. "Charlotte." "Sir, your car is waiting." Margaret appeared with her usual impeccable timing, tablet in hand. "And your sister has called 4 times. Apparently it's urgent. Something about Mercury being in retrograde." The moment shattered. Lorenzo nodded curtly, gave Charlotte one last unreadable look, and strode toward the exit, leaving her standing amid the chaos of travelers with a heart full of confusion. 3 days later, Charlotte was beginning to wonder if she had imagined the entire week. Lorenzo had retreated behind walls so high she couldn't even see over them. In meetings, he was coldly professional. In the hallways, he nodded in acknowledgement, but kept walking. On the shared terrace of their memories, she was alone with the ghost of what might have been. "He's processing," Margaret said one afternoon, appearing at Charlotte's desk with a cup of tea. "He does this. Gets close to something real, then panics and retreats. Give him time." "How much time?" "That depends on how stubborn you are." Margaret's lips curved. "I have a feeling you're stubborn enough." Charlotte was contemplating this when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was instantly recognizable. "Charlotte! My dear, brilliant Charlotte!" Harold Pembroke's theatrical baritone flooded through the speaker. "I've been searching for you everywhere." Harold, her former boss, the man who had publicly humiliated her, then fired her while she was still crying on the conference room floor. "Harold," she said flatly, "how did you get this number?" I have my ways, darling. Listen, I need to see you. I've made a terrible mistake. The mistake that haunts my dreams. Please, let me make amends. Dinner tonight? The Wolseley? I'll explain everything. Charlotte opened her mouth to refuse, but something stopped her. Curiosity, perhaps, or the petty satisfaction of seeing the man who had destroyed her confidence now apparently desperate for her return. Fine, she heard herself say. 8 o'clock. The Wolseley was packed with the kind of elegant crowd that made Charlotte feel like an imposter. She had dressed carefully, a sophisticated emerald dress that Beatrice had insisted brought out her eyes, and was regretting the heels before she even sat down. Harold was already at the table, looking appropriately contrite. His silver hair was disheveled in a way that suggested he had been running his hands through it, and his eyes were suspiciously moist. Charlotte. He stood, clasping her hands with theatrical intensity. You look radiant. Success agrees with you. I haven't been successful. I had a breakdown. A breakthrough. He guided her to her seat. A beautiful, creative breakthrough that I was too blind to appreciate. I fired you in a moment of madness, and I have regretted it every single day since. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. You called security. A terrible lapse in judgment. Harold dabbed at his eyes with a napkin. The agency has suffered without you. Our campaigns are lifeless. Our clients are fleeing. Just last week, the organic dog food company moved to another agency. Worse. They said our work lacked emotional authenticity. He leaned forward, grasping her hands again. Charlotte, I'm begging you, come back. Full creative director position. Triple your previous salary. Complete artistic freedom. Anything you want. It was everything she had dreamed of hearing 3 months ago. The validation, the recognition, the proof that she wasn't a failure. And yet, sitting here, watching Harold perform his remorse like a one-man show, she felt nothing but mild irritation. I have a job, Harold. At Ashford Hotels? Yes, I've heard. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Interesting choice. Lorenzo Ashford has quite the reputation. What kind of reputation? Cold, ruthless. Uses people and discards them when they're no longer useful. Harold's voice dripped with false concern. I'd hate to see you hurt again, Charlotte. At least with me you know what you're getting. Before Charlotte could respond, a familiar voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. Miss Price, what a coincidence. Lorenzo stood beside their table, immaculate in a dark suit, his expression carved from ice. Charlotte's heart lurched painfully in her chest. Mr. Ashford. She tried to sound casual and failed miserably. What are you doing here? Dinner meeting cancelled. His gaze flickered to Harold with barely concealed contempt. And you must be Harold Pembroke, the man who fired Charlotte during a mental health crisis and called security on her. Harold's composure faltered. I don't believe we've met. We haven't, but I make it my business to know who mistreats people I value. Lorenzo's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Enjoy your dinner. He walked away without looking back, leaving Charlotte staring after him with a mixture of hope and confusion. He valued her. He had said it in front of Harold, in front of the entire restaurant, like it was simple fact. Well, Harold huffed, clearly rattled. That was rather rude. Charlotte stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her water glass. I have to go. But the job offer? The answer is no. She grabbed her bag. I don't want to go back, Harold. I've moved forward. She left him sputtering at the table and pushed through the restaurant toward the exit, heart pounding. Lorenzo was gone. Of course he was gone. He'd probably left immediately. But when she burst onto the street, she found him standing on the pavement, hands in his pockets, waiting. You came after me, she breathed. I was already here. The meeting wasn't cancelled. He turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd returned from Tuscany, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. I saw you through the window with him laughing. He made a joke. I laughed to be polite. It meant nothing. It didn't look like nothing. Charlotte stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the uncertainty he was trying so hard to hide. Are you jealous, Lorenzo Ashford? His silence was answer enough. I didn't take the job, she said softly. He offered me everything I thought I wanted 3 months ago, and I said no. Do you want to know why? Tell me. Because 3 months ago I hadn't met you. And now, she trailed off, suddenly afraid of how much she was about to reveal. Lorenzo closed the distance between them, stopping just inches away. And now? Now I want something different. Someone different. She lifted her chin defiantly. Even if he's terrible at communicating and has been ignoring me for 3 days. Something cracked in his expression, the wall crumbling, the armor falling away. I wasn't ignoring you. I was terrified. Of what? Of how much I want this, of how badly I could ruin it. He raised his hand, hesitating, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I've never done this before, Charlotte. Wanted someone so much that it makes me stupid. She laughed, the sound catching in her throat. You're not stupid, you're just learning. Teach me then. His voice was barely a whisper. Teach me how to do this right. They stood there on the pavement, the London night swirling around them, close enough to touch but not quite touching. Charlotte could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, the beginning of something or the end of nothing. She chose the beginning. Take me home, she said, and we'll figure it out together. Charlotte's mother, Patricia Price, had raised her daughter with 2 unshakable beliefs. Always carry an umbrella and never trust a man who doesn't eat carbohydrates. When she learned that Charlotte was seeing someone from work, she immediately demanded a dinner meeting to assess the situation. It's not an interrogation, Patricia insisted over the phone. It's simply a mother's prerogative to ensure her only daughter isn't being swept away by some charming sociopath. He's not a sociopath. That's exactly what someone being charmed by a sociopath would say. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening at Charlotte's flat, which meant she spent all of Friday in a cleaning frenzy that bordered on obsessive. Mrs. Chen watched the preparations with undisguised glee, offering unsolicited commentary from the hallway. New curtains, very nice. Is the rich boyfriend coming? My friend Doris wants to know if he drives a different car every time or just the one. Just the one, Mrs. Chen. Pity. I had money on multiple cars. Lorenzo arrived precisely on time, carrying flowers for Patricia and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Charlotte's rent. He looked devastatingly handsome in a dark cashmere sweater that Charlotte had never seen before, softer than his usual armor of suits and sharp edges. You look nervous, she murmured as she took his coat. I've negotiated deals with heads of state. I've faced hostile takeovers and corporate espionage. He glanced toward the kitchen where Patricia was making suspicious clattering sounds. Your mother terrifies me. Good. She should. Patricia emerged with the energy of a prosecutor approaching the witness stand. She was 55, with Charlotte's same honey-colored hair and a gaze that could detect insincerity at 40 paces. Mr. Ashford. She shook his hand with exactly enough pressure to establish dominance. I've read extensively about you. The Financial Times was complimentary. The tabloids less so. The tabloids once claimed I was secretly married to a pop star I've never met. And are you? Secretly married? Mother, Charlotte interjected. It's a fair question. Patricia's eyes never left Lorenzo's face. You have quite the reputation with women. Lorenzo, to his credit, didn't flinch. I've dated, Mrs. Price. I've never been serious about anyone before, but I'm serious about your daughter. The words hung in the air. Charlotte felt her heart stutter. Patricia studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. We'll see. Dinner is ready. I hope you eat carbohydrates, Mr. Ashford. Men who don't eat carbohydrates have something to hide. I love carbohydrates. Excellent. There's hope for you yet. The dinner was an exercise in controlled chaos. Patricia asked probing questions about Lorenzo's childhood, his business practices, and his 5-year plan. Lorenzo answered with surprising patience, occasionally catching Charlotte's eye with a look that said he was simultaneously amused and overwhelmed. Do you have any hereditary health conditions? Patricia asked, serving dessert. Mother, we've been dating for approximately 3 weeks. Preparation is important, Charlotte. Your father had an uncle with gout. I should have asked more questions. I have no gout, Lorenzo offered, or any hereditary conditions I'm aware of. Well, that's something. By the end of the evening, Patricia had thawed approximately 2 degrees, from Arctic to merely frigid. As she gathered her things to leave, she pulled Charlotte aside. He's not what I expected, she admitted quietly. Is that good or bad? The way he looks at you. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Like you're the only person in the room. Your father used to look at me like that. She patted Charlotte's cheek. I'm reserving final judgment. But there's potential. From Patricia Price, that was practically a declaration of love. The following week brought an unexpected development. Sophia Ashford requested lunch. "She probably wants to threaten me," Charlotte told Beatrice over the phone. "She's been suspicious since the support group." As Beatrice countered excitedly, "She wants to give you her blessing. Like in every romance novel ever written, the protective sister realizes you're genuine and becomes your ally. You need to read fewer romance novels. You need to read more. They're educational." The lunch was at a quiet restaurant in Chelsea that Sophia had chosen specifically because, as she explained, the lighting is flattering for emotional conversations. She arrived in flowing layers of cream and beige, crystals dangling from her ears, looking like she had stepped out of a wellness retreat advertisement. "I owe you an apology," Sophia announced, before Charlotte could even sit down. "When you first appeared at the support group, I thought you were another fortune hunter. Lorenzo attracts them like moths to very expensive flames." "I understand. But then I saw how he changed." Sophia's eyes, so like her brother's, grew serious. "He smiles now. Not the fake smile he uses for board meetings. Real smiles. He called me last week just to talk, not about business. He hasn't done that in years." Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest. "He's different with me too. Softer. He's terrified, you know." Sophia reached across the table to grasp Charlotte's hand. "Our mother leaving broke something in him. He spent his whole life building walls so no one can hurt him like that again. And you've somehow gotten past all of them." "I didn't mean to." "Of course you didn't. That's why it worked." Sophia smiled, and for the first time there was genuine affection in it. "I just need to know one thing. Do you love him? Really love him? Not his money, not his power, but him?" Charlotte thought about Lorenzo reading children's books with dramatic voices, about him admitting he'd never cried since he was 14, about the way he looked at her like she was both a mystery and an answer. "Yes," she said simply. "I love him." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, happy tears for once. "Then welcome to the family. It's dysfunctional and exhausting, but we have excellent wine." Charlotte laughed, feeling something settle into place in her heart. "I can work with that. Oh, and one more thing." Sophia leaned in conspiratorially. "Don't tell Lorenzo about this lunch. Let him think I'm still suspicious. It's good for his ego to worry a little. Your secret is safe with me. I knew I liked you." Sophia raised her water glass in a toast. "To new beginnings, and to my brother finally getting his head out of his spreadsheets long enough to find happiness." Charlotte clinked her glass against Sophia's, smiling at the unexpected turn her life had taken. 3 months ago she had been sobbing over dog food. Now she was having sisterly bonding sessions with a crystal-wearing heiress who quoted meditation apps. Life, she was learning, was wonderfully unpredictable. The trouble started with a folder. Harold Pembroke, apparently unwilling to accept defeat gracefully, had sent a formal written offer to Charlotte's desk at Ashford Hotels. The package was excessive. Leather-bound folder, embossed letterhead, promises printed in elegant typography that probably cost more than Charlotte's monthly rent. She had meant to throw it away. Instead, it sat on her desk for 3 days while she dealt with the Tuscany presentation materials, forgotten under a pile of sketches and mood boards. Lorenzo found it on a Thursday afternoon. Charlotte was in a meeting with the photography team when he walked into her office unannounced, looking for the revised proposal they had discussed that morning. What he found instead was an open folder bearing Harold Pembroke's signature and an offer that would triple Charlotte's salary, give her complete creative control, and establish her as one of the most powerful figures in London advertising. He was still holding it when she returned. "You kept this," he said flatly, not looking up. Charlotte's stomach dropped. "Lorenzo, that's not—" "Triple salary, creative director position, complete artistic freedom." He finally raised his eyes, and the coldness in them made her flinch. "It's a remarkable offer, which I already refused at the restaurant. You were there. You refused verbally, but you kept the written offer." He set the folder down with careful precision, his movements controlled in a way that signaled danger. "Why would you do that unless you were considering it? I forgot it was there. I've been buried in work for the Tuscany presentation, your presentation, and I didn't even remember. Perhaps that's the problem." Lorenzo's voice was quiet, deadly calm. "Perhaps you shouldn't be buried in my presentation when you have better options waiting." Charlotte felt the first stirrings of anger beneath her panic. That's not fair, isn't it? Harold Pembroke can offer you prestige, creative freedom, a career that's actually in your field. He gestured vaguely at the office. What can I offer? A consulting position at a hotel chain, a complicated relationship that I still don't know how to navigate, a family that comes with more baggage than an airport carousel. Stop it. Stop what? Being realistic? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Charlotte, you're brilliant. The work you've done for Tuscany proves that. You could have any job in London. You don't need to be here. You're right, I don't need to be here. She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. I want to be here. There's a difference. Why can't you see that? Something flickered in his expression. Doubt, hope, fear. But it was gone before she could grasp it. Because in my experience, people leave. They find better options and they leave. I'm not your mother, Lorenzo. The words landed like a physical blow. She watched the color drain from his face, watched him retreat behind walls she thought they had dismantled together. No, he said quietly, you're not. But you will leave eventually. Everyone does. And I'd rather... He stopped, jaw clenching. You'd rather push me away first. Control the ending instead of risking it. Charlotte felt tears burning behind her eyes. That's cowardice, Lorenzo. And I thought you were braver than that. Maybe you were wrong. The silence between them was devastating. Charlotte wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand that she wasn't going anywhere. But she could see the shutters closing, watch him transform back into the cold, sarcastic man she had met in that basement support group. Fine, she said, her voice breaking only slightly. If that's what you want, it's what's best. For who? He didn't answer. Charlotte gathered her bag with trembling hands, refusing to let him see her cry. The Tuscany presentation is finished, she said, her professional voice emerging from somewhere deep inside. Everything you need is on the shared drive. Margaret can handle any questions. Charlotte, don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. You don't get to push me away and then say my name like that. It doesn't work both ways. She left without looking back, making it all the way to the elevator before the tears came. Mrs. Chen was waiting when Charlotte stumbled into her building, makeup ruined, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. He hurt you, Mrs. Chen said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. The rich one. It's complicated. Love always is. Mrs. Chen guided her toward the stairs with surprising gentleness. Come, I make you tea. My grandmother's recipe. Cures heartbreak. Also constipation, but we focus on heartbreak tonight. In Mrs. Chen's tiny flat, surrounded by photographs of grandchildren and the smell of jasmine tea, Charlotte finally let herself fall apart. He's afraid, she sobbed. He's so afraid of being left that he pushed me away first, and I don't know how to fight that. You don't fight fear, Mrs. Chen said wisely, pressing a warm cup into Charlotte's hands. Fear is like stray cat. You chase, it runs. You sit quiet, it comes to you. That doesn't make any sense. It will. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. Give him time to miss you, to feel the empty. Then he will understand what he threw away. Meanwhile, across London, Marcus Drake found Lorenzo drinking alone at their usual club, looking like a man who had recently set fire to something precious. What did you do? Marcus demanded, sliding into the opposite chair. What I should have done weeks ago. Ended it before she could. You absolute idiot. Marcus flagged down a waiter for reinforcements. I've spent months telling you relationships don't work, and the one time you find something real, you listen to me. Have you learned nothing? I'm a disaster. I shouldn't be anyone's role model. Lorenzo stared into his whiskey. She had an offer from her old boss. A better future. And she chose you instead, you magnificent moron. She chose you. And you threw it in her face because you're terrified of being happy. Marcus groaned. I was wrong, okay? About all of it. Watching you with her. It made me remember what I lost, what I gave up because I was too proud to fight for it. What are you saying? I'm saying love is messy and terrifying and completely irrational, and you have to be brave enough to risk it anyway. Marcus leaned forward, deadly serious. Fix this, Lorenzo, before you lose the best thing that ever happened to you. Lorenzo said nothing, but his grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles went white. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the London sky, and the city braced itself for a storm. 3 days without Charlotte felt like 3 years. Lorenzo moved through his life like a ghost, attending meetings he didn't remember, signing documents he barely read. Margaret watched him with a mixture of pity and exasperation, her sighs growing louder and more pointed with each passing hour. "You look terrible," she informed him on the second morning. "Thank you, Margaret. Your support is invaluable. I'm not here to support your self-destruction." She set a cup of coffee on his desk with more force than necessary. "I'm here to tell you that Miss Price's resignation letter arrived this morning. I haven't processed it yet." Lorenzo's heart stopped. "Resignation? Did you expect her to stay after what you did?" Margaret's expression softened slightly. "She loved you, you know. Anyone with eyes could see it. And you threw it away because you were scared. I was protecting her. You were protecting yourself. There's a difference." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I've worked for you for 12 years, Mr. Ashford. I've seen you build an empire through sheer force of will. But this is the first time I've seen you be a coward." The word echoed in his head long after she was gone. That evening, Sophia appeared at his flat, unannounced, armed with a bottle of wine and an expression that promised violence. "You absolute disaster of a human being," she announced, sweeping past him into the living room. "I just had lunch with Charlotte last week. I gave her my blessing. I told her welcome to the family. And now I find out you've sabotaged everything because of your pathological fear of abandonment. Sophia, don't Sophia me." She whirled to face him, crystals swinging dangerously. "I spent 3 months in a support group learning to process my feelings after Richard left me at the altar. 3 months of Gerald's confusing metaphors and that weird man who competes over who has the saddest story. And you know what I learned? That love is like a raccoon in a pool. That running from pain doesn't make it smaller, it makes it grow." Sophia's voice cracked. "You pushed away the first real thing you've ever had because you're terrified of being hurt. But you're already hurt, Lorenzo. You've been hurt since Mum left. And hiding from love hasn't protected you. It's just made you lonely." Lorenzo sank onto the sofa, the weight of her words crushing him. "I don't know how to fix this." "Yes, you do." Sophia sat beside him, her anger softening into something gentler. "You go to her. You tell her the truth. All of it. The fear, the self-sabotage, the way she makes you feel like you're standing on the edge of a cliff without a safety net. What if she doesn't forgive me? Then at least you'll know you tried." Sophia took his hand, squeezing tight. "But I've seen the way she looks at you, brother. That woman loves you. And love like that doesn't disappear in 3 days. It just waits for the idiot on the other side to catch up." The next morning, Lorenzo did something he never thought he would do again. He went to Gerald's support group. The basement smelled exactly as he remembered, old books and desperation with a hint of herbal tea. Gerald was already there, arranging chairs in a circle that was somehow both crooked and hopeful. "Mr. Ashford," Gerald beamed, immediately knocking over a stack of pamphlets. "What a surprise. Are you here to process your emotional journey?" "I'm looking for Charlotte. Charlotte Price. Has she been here?" Gerald's expression turned thoughtful. "She came to our last session, very upset, spoke about a separation that she thought was different from the others, but turned out to have the same ending." Lorenzo's chest tightened. What did she say? That she had finally allowed herself to believe in something, and it had fallen apart. Gerald began picking up the scattered pamphlets with meditative patience. She said it was like watching a beautiful bridge collapse just as she reached the middle. She didn't know whether to go forward or back. "Where is she now?" "I couldn't say, but I can tell you this." Gerald paused, meeting Lorenzo's eyes with unexpected clarity. "Love is not like a raccoon in a pool, Mr. Ashford. I've been saying that for years, and it's complete nonsense." Lorenzo blinked. "I'm sorry. Love is more like—" Gerald waved his hands vaguely. "Like building something together, brick by brick, day by day. Sometimes the foundation cracks, and you have to decide whether to rebuild or walk away." He smiled gently. "The question is, are you a builder or a walker?" It was, Lorenzo realized, the first sensible thing Gerald had ever said. He found Charlotte's address through means that were probably unethical. Margaret had accidentally left the personnel file on his desk and stood outside her building for 20 minutes before finding the courage to enter. Mrs. Chen intercepted him in the lobby like a tiny, formidable security guard. "You," she said, eyes narrowing, "the one who broke her heart. I'm here to fix it. She cried for 2 days. My tea only works so fast." Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "Why should I let you up?" Lorenzo took a deep breath. "Because I love her. I've never loved anyone before, and I did everything wrong because I was terrified. But I'm more terrified of losing her forever than I am of getting hurt." He met the older woman's gaze steadily. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I'm just asking for a chance to try." Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile crept across her face. "Flat 4B. But I warn you, she has a cast-iron skillet and she knows how to use it." "Noted." "Also," Mrs. Chen called after him as he headed for the stairs, "my friend Doris is watching from across the street. If you hurt her again, the whole neighborhood will know within minutes." Lorenzo climbed the stairs with a heart that felt like it was trying to escape his chest. Each step brought him closer to either the best moment of his life or the worst. He reached 4B and raised his hand to knock. Then he heard it, laughter. Charlotte's laughter, bright and unguarded, followed by Beatrice's excited squeal. "I told you it was enemies to lovers. I told you." He smiled despite his nerves. Even now, on the precipice of everything, Charlotte was surrounded by people who loved her. People who saw her for exactly who she was. She deserved someone brave enough to do the same. Lorenzo knocked. The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. The door swung open. And there she was, beautiful, exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, wearing an oversized jumper that somehow made her look like everything he had ever wanted. "Lorenzo," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt every wall he had ever built crumble into dust. "I came to tell you the truth," he said, "all of it, and to ask if you'll let me try again." Charlotte stared at him, her expression unreadable. Behind her, Beatrice whispered urgently, "This is exactly like the scene in chapter 18. Say yes. For the love of literature, say yes." Charlotte ignored her. "You broke my heart," she said quietly. "I know. You pushed me away because you were scared." "I know. And now you expect me to just forgive you?" Lorenzo shook his head. "I don't expect anything. I'm just asking you to listen, and then you can decide if I deserve another chance." A long moment passed. Then Charlotte stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Make them count." He walked into her flat, knowing that the next 5 minutes would determine the rest of his life. Beatrice had positioned herself on the sofa with the intensity of someone watching the final act of a play they had waited years to see. Charlotte shot her a look that clearly said, "Leave," but Beatrice shook her head vigorously and mouthed, "Not for anything in the world." Lorenzo stood in the middle of Charlotte's small living room, looking more uncomfortable than she had ever seen him. His usual armor of confidence and sarcasm had been stripped away, leaving behind something raw and achingly human. 5 minutes, Charlotte reminded him, arms crossed. "The clock is ticking." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had never witnessed before. "I've been practicing what to say the entire way here. I had a speech. It was eloquent, logical, persuasive." He laughed humorlessly. "And now I can't remember a single word of it." "Then just tell me the truth." "The truth." He met her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch. "The truth is that I've spent my entire adult life protecting myself from exactly this moment, from standing in front of someone I love and admitting that I'm terrified." Love. He had said love. "I watched my mother leave when I was 14, Lorenzo continued, his voice rough. "She walked out of our house with 2 suitcases and didn't look back. Not at my father, not at Sophia, not at me. She just left. And something inside me decided that day that I would never give anyone the power to hurt me like that again." Charlotte felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she didn't move, didn't speak. "So I built walls. I kept everyone at a distance. I told myself that control was better than vulnerability, that independence was safer than love." He took a step closer. "And then you walked into that ridiculous support group with your corporate divorce and your dog food campaign, and you made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years." Beatrice made a small sound that might have been a sob. Charlotte ignored her. Every day since then, you've been dismantling me piece by piece, Lorenzo said. You've shown me what it feels like to want someone so much that it overrides every logical instinct I have, and instead of embracing it, I panicked. I saw that offer from Harold, and all I could think was, she's going to leave, she's going to find something better and leave, just like my mother did. I'm not your mother, Charlotte said softly. I know that now. He reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering in the space between them. You are nothing like her. You are the most genuine, authentic, impossibly stubborn person I have ever met. You fight for what you believe in. You don't run when things get hard. You stayed even when I was impossible to work with, even when I pushed you away, even when I gave you every reason to go. I stayed because I saw who you really are, Charlotte whispered. Underneath all the sarcasm and the control, I saw the man who reads children's books with dramatic voices, who learned piano to have something that was just his, who loves his sister enough to sit through Gerald's ridiculous metaphors week after week. Lorenzo's eyes glistened. Charlotte, I'm not finished. She stepped closer, close enough to touch if she chose to. You broke my heart. Not because you were scared, but because you didn't trust me enough to tell me you were scared. You made a decision about my future without asking me. You pushed me away to protect yourself, and you called it protecting me. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. Sorry isn't enough. Charlotte lifted her chin. I need to know that you won't do this again. That the next time you're terrified, you'll talk to me instead of running. I can handle your fear, Lorenzo. I can handle your baggage and your walls and your ridiculous emotional constipation. What I can't handle is being pushed away. I won't. He finally closed the distance between them, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I promise you, Charlotte, I will spend the rest of my life learning how to be brave enough for you. I'll fail sometimes, I'm not perfect, and God knows I'm not good at this, but I will never stop trying. The rest of your life? She repeated, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. That's quite a commitment. I'm a businessman. When I invest in something, I invest fully. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheekbones. You're the best investment I've ever made. I was just too stupid to realize it until I almost lost you. Charlotte felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She had spent 3 days crying, 3 days convinced that the most beautiful thing she had ever experienced was over. And now here he was, stripped bare, offering her everything she had wanted. I love you, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Even when you're being an idiot. Especially when I'm being an idiot, he corrected, his voice rough with emotion, because apparently that's most of the time. True. She smiled through her tears. I suppose someone has to keep you in line. I can't think of anyone better for the job. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she rose on her tiptoes, meeting him halfway. When their lips finally touched, it was like every near miss, every almost moment. Every charged glance had been leading to this single instant. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, questioning, but then Charlotte's hands fisted in his sweater, pulling him closer, and everything ignited. Lorenzo kissed her like she was air, and he had been drowning. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as he deepened the kiss with a desperation that stole her breath. She felt every emotion he had been suppressing, the fear, the longing, the overwhelming relief, pour through the connection of their lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. That was worth waiting for, he murmured. I've been wanting to do that since Tuscany, she admitted. I've been wanting to do that since you called your termination a corporate divorce. He laughed softly. I'm just exceptionally slow. From the sofa came a loud, dramatic sniffle. They both turned to find Beatrice openly weeping, clutching a throw pillow like a lifeline. That was beautiful, Beatrice sobbed. Better than any book. Better than Darcy's declaration. Better than... Beatrice, Charlotte interrupted gently. Could you perhaps give us a moment? Right. Yes, of course. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, still clutching the pillow. I'll go tell Mrs. Chen that everything worked out. She'll want to update Doris. She practically ran for the door, then paused. Oh, and Lorenzo, if you hurt her again, I teach secondary school students. I know how to make someone's life very unpleasant. Noted, Lorenzo said, with what might have been the ghost of fear. The door closed behind Beatrice, leaving them alone. So, Charlotte said, her arms still wrapped around his neck. What happens now? Lorenzo smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Now we figure it out together, day by day, brick by brick. His lips brushed against hers softly. If you'll have me, I'll have you, she said. Emotional baggage and all. It's quite a lot of baggage. Good thing I'm excellent at unpacking. He laughed, the sound warm and free, and kissed her again. Outside, the London evening wrapped around them like a promise, and somewhere in the building, Mrs. Chen was already spreading the news that love had conquered fear. It was, Charlotte thought, as Lorenzo's arms tightened around her, exactly how the best stories were supposed to end. Except this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Charlotte had always believed that falling in love happened in grand gestures, dramatic declarations, sweeping romantic moments lifted from the pages of Beatrice's beloved novels. But with Lorenzo, she discovered that love was built in smaller ways. In the coffee he brought to her desk every morning, prepared exactly how she liked it, without her ever having to ask. In the way he learned to text her goodnight even when he was drowning in work. In his patient listening when she rambled about creative concepts that most people would find incomprehensible. And in the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious, something he still couldn't quite believe was real. The Tuscany presentation to the board was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, and Charlotte had never been more nervous in her life. This was her vision, her creative rebirth, laid bare before a room of executives who controlled billions in assets and had probably never experienced uncertainty in their lives. "You're going to be brilliant," Lorenzo murmured as they waited outside the boardroom. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become second nature. What if they hate it? Then they're wrong. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. But they won't hate it. They'll see exactly what I saw the first time you pitched this idea. Someone who understands that luxury isn't about thread counts and marble bathrooms. It's about connection, meaning, coming home to yourself. Charlotte felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. You can't say things like that right before I have to be professional. I'll say whatever I want. CEO privileges. The presentation was, according to Margaret's later assessment, the most engaged I've seen the board since 1987, and that was only because someone accidentally set the curtains on fire. Charlotte spoke with passion about authentic experiences, about partnering with local artisans, about transforming guests from tourists into temporary members of communities that had existed for centuries. She showed the photographs they had taken in Tuscany, real moments unpolished and beautiful. She played testimonials from Giuseppe, from Lucia, the ceramic artist, from the family who had been making wine on the same hillside for 6 generations. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then the chairman, Lorenzo's father, a silver-haired man whose expression had remained unreadable throughout, began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by the others, until the room filled with applause. "Miss Price," the chairman said with the ghost of a smile, "I believe you've just saved us from ourselves." That evening, Lorenzo took her to dinner at a small restaurant in Hampstead that he had never shared with anyone before. It was his secret place, he explained, somewhere he came when the weight of expectations became too heavy. "Thank you," Charlotte said over candlelight, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for teaching me that control is overrated." He reached across the table, his fingers tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "I've spent my whole life trying to manage every variable, minimize every risk. And then you came along, completely unpredictable, and showed me that the best things happen when you stop trying to control the outcome. I'm still pretty unpredictable. I'm counting on it." After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets, the autumn air crisp against their skin. When they reached his car, Lorenzo hesitated, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. "Come home with me," he said softly. It wasn't a demand or an assumption. It was a question, gentle and uncertain. "If you want to. Only if you want to." Charlotte looked at this man who had fought through every fear to stand before her, offering himself without armor or pretense. And she knew, with a certainty that filled her entire being, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I want to," she whispered. His flat was nothing like she had imagined. She had expected sleek minimalism, bachelor coldness. Instead, she found warm lighting, books stacked on every surface, a piano in the corner that showed signs of regular use. It was a home, not a showpiece, and seeing it felt like being given access to another hidden part of him. "I should warn you," Lorenzo said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'm nervous. Which is ridiculous because I've wanted this for weeks, and now that we're here I feel like a teenager who's never—" He stopped, laughing at himself. "I'm making this awkward." Charlotte crossed the distance between them, placing her hands on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palms, matching the tempo of her own. "I'm nervous too," she admitted, "but I don't want to be anywhere else." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, not with the desperation of their reconciliation, but with something deeper, tenderness threaded through desire, patience woven with longing. His lips traced the curve of her jaw, the column of her throat, worshipping each inch of skin as if committing it to memory. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her collarbone. "You're so incredibly beautiful. And I don't just mean—" He pulled back, meeting her eyes. "All of you. Everything you are. I've never felt this way about anyone." Charlotte felt tears slide down her cheeks, and he kissed each one away. They moved together to his bedroom, where soft lamplight cast everything in gold. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his fingers trembling slightly as each layer fell away. When she stood before him, vulnerable and exposed, his breath caught. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Yes, you do." She reached for him, pulling him close. "We deserve each other." What followed was not the passionate collision of novels and films. It was something quieter, more profound. Two people who had spent their lives building walls, finally allowing themselves to be completely seen. Lorenzo touched her like she was precious, like every caress was a promise he intended to keep. He paid attention to the catch of her breath, the arch of her back, learning the language of her pleasure, with the same dedication he brought to everything he cared about. And Charlotte, in his arms, felt the last of her insecurities dissolve. Here, in this moment, she was not the woman who had broken down over dog food, not the creative who had been deemed unstable and discarded. She was simply herself, beloved, desired, enough. When they finally lay tangled together in the quiet aftermath, Lorenzo traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, his expression soft in a way she had never seen before. "I love you," he said. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to know. I mean it with everything I am. Every broken, terrified, slowly healing part of me." Charlotte propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "I love you too. Every controlled, secretly romantic, learning to be vulnerable part of you." He laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest beneath her palm. "We're quite a pair. We're perfect for each other." She leaned down to kiss him softly. "Now stop analyzing and go to sleep. We have a celebratory brunch with your sister tomorrow, and she's going to be insufferable. Sophia's already texted me 17 times asking for details. Tell her we watched a documentary and went to bed early." Lorenzo grinned. "She'll never believe that." "No," Charlotte agreed, settling into the curve of his body like she had always belonged there. "But it'll drive her crazy trying to figure out the truth." Outside, London sparkled with 1,000 lights, and somewhere in the city new stories were beginning. But in this quiet room, with this man whose heart beat steady and sure against her back, Charlotte had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. She had found home. 6 months later, Charlotte stood on the terrace of the Ashford Tuscany property, watching the sunset paint the olive groves in shades of amber and rose. The hotel had been transformed by her vision, artisan partnerships, experiential programs, a sense of authenticity that had tripled bookings and earned rave reviews from critics who called it a revolution in luxury hospitality. But tonight, the hotel was closed to regular guests. Tonight it belonged only to family. "You look beautiful," Beatrice said, appearing at Charlotte's elbow with 2 glasses of Prosecco. "That dress is perfection. Very Florentine romance." Charlotte smoothed the soft champagne-colored fabric, a flowing thing she had found in a vintage shop in London, and smiled. "Lorenzo said we were having a small celebration, but this feels bigger." Beatrice's eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. "I'm sure it's nothing. Just a casual dinner for 30 people in a restored Italian monastery. Beatrice, what do you know? Nothing. I know absolutely nothing. Her voice hit a pitch that suggested she knew everything. Oh, look, there's your mother interrogating Lorenzo's father about the family's medical history. I should go supervise. She vanished before Charlotte could press further. The dinner was held in the monastery's ancient refectory, candlelight flickering against stone walls that had witnessed centuries of shared meals. The table was crowded with everyone who had become part of their story. Sophia, radiant in flowing silk and crystals, Marcus looking uncomfortable but present. Patricia Price, engaged in what appeared to be a very serious conversation with Lorenzo's father about hereditary cholesterol levels. Beatrice's boyfriend Tom, who seemed perpetually confused by the intensity of the people around him. Mrs. Chen, who had been flown in as a special guest and was already taking photographs for Doris. And at the end of the table, Giuseppe wept silently into his napkin, muttering about Rosa and how she would have loved this moment. Even Gerald was there, seated between Margaret and the man from the support group who competed over tragedies. He kept offering metaphors that nobody understood, but his presence felt right somehow, a reminder of where it all began. Lorenzo sat beside Charlotte, his hand finding hers beneath the table with the ease of long practice. He had been oddly quiet all evening, a subtle tension in his shoulders that she couldn't quite interpret. "Are you all right?" she murmured during a lull in conversation. "Perfect." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Just thinking about how different my life was a year ago, how empty it was without me even realizing. And now? Now I have everything I never knew I wanted." His eyes held hers, dark and full of something that made her heart race. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something." Around them, the table had gone suspiciously quiet. Charlotte noticed Sophia gripping Marcus's arm, Beatrice literally bouncing in her seat, and Mrs. Chen positioning her phone for a better camera angle. "Lorenzo, what's—" He stood, and the movement silenced every whisper. Then, with a grace she had never seen from him before, he lowered himself to one knee beside her chair. Charlotte's heart stopped. "I have spent my entire life running from this moment," Lorenzo said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Running from the vulnerability of loving someone completely, from the risk of building something that could break. But you taught me that the things worth having are the things worth fighting for." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. When he opened it, Charlotte saw a ring, elegant, vintage, with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the candlelight like captured stars. "This was my grandmother's," he said, "the only woman in my family who stayed, who loved fiercely and completely without reservation. I've been waiting my whole life to find someone worthy of wearing it." Charlotte felt tears streaming down her face, but she couldn't move to wipe them away. She could only stare at this man who had transformed from a sarcastic stranger into the center of her universe. "Charlotte Elizabeth Price," Lorenzo continued, "you are chaos and creativity and everything I never knew I needed. You make me laugh when I want to control. You make me feel when I want to hide. You have shown me that love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding someone worth being brave for." He took a shaky breath. "Will you marry me?" The refectory erupted before she could answer. Sophia burst into tears, clutching at Marcus while sobbing. "I manifested this. My crystals worked." Marcus, looking stunned, muttered, "I take it all back. Every pessimistic thing I ever said. Love is real, and I've been an idiot." Beatrice screamed at a volume that made Tom wince. "I knew it. I said it from the beginning. This is Pride and Prejudice. You're Elizabeth and Darcy." Gerald stood up, tears streaming down his face, and announced, "Love is not like a raccoon in a pool. Love is like this, whatever this is." Mrs. Chen shouted into her phone, "Doris, are you getting this? He's proposing, the rich one. I told you they would end up together." Patricia Price simply nodded with satisfaction and said to Lorenzo's father, "Well, at least the grandchildren will have good genes." Through it all, Charlotte laughed and cried and felt her heart expand beyond anything she had thought possible. She looked at Lorenzo, patient, nervous, waiting for her answer with everything he had laid bare, and knew that her answer had been written from the moment he laughed at her in that support group basement. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Lorenzo's face transformed with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he was on his feet, pulling her into his arms, kissing her while their mismatched, wonderful family cheered and wept and captured every moment for posterity. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," she replied, "even when you're being insufferably romantic." "Get used to it," he said. "I have a lot of lost time to make up for." From across the table, Margaret raised her glass with a smile that softened her usually stern expression. "Who would have thought," she said to no one in particular, "that the boss actually had a heart?" Farsi Tatamasamaton 1 year later, on the same terrace where he had proposed, Lorenzo Ashford sat reading a children's book with theatrical intensity that made his audience of one giggle uncontrollably. And then the bunny said, "I will love you forever," he read, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. The end. Isabella Rose Ashford, 6 months old with her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's dark eyes, grabbed at the book with chubby fingers and made a sound that might have been approval. Charlotte watched from the doorway, her heart so full it almost hurt. The Tuscan afternoon stretched golden and warm around them, and somewhere in the olive grove below, Giuseppe was probably talking to Rosa's spirit about how beautiful the bambina was. "So you're supposed to be reviewing quarterly reports," she said, walking over to join her family. "The reports can wait." Lorenzo shifted Isabella to make room for Charlotte beside him. "This is more important." "Reading about bunnies?" "Being here. With both of you." He pressed a kiss to Charlotte's temple, then to Isabella's downy head. "I spent so many years convinced that this wasn't possible for me, that I wasn't built for this kind of happiness. And now? Now I can't imagine any other life." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made Charlotte's breath catch. "You didn't just teach me how to love, Charlotte. You taught me how to live." Isabella chose that moment to spit up on Lorenzo's very expensive shirt. He didn't even flinch. "That's my girl," Charlotte laughed, already keeping him humble. Like mother, like daughter. Lorenzo stood, Isabella cradled expertly against his shoulder. "Come on. Giuseppe is preparing dinner, and I've been informed that if we're late, he'll cry again." They walked together through the ancient corridors of the monastery, past the shrine to Rosa that now included a photograph of their wedding day, past the Botticelli suite where everything had almost begun, past Margaret's temporary office where she was probably terrorizing someone via video call. Outside, the Tuscan evening settled over the hills like a blessing. In the olive grove, the wind rustled through silver leaves, carrying the sound of laughter and love, and the promise of all the years to come. Charlotte thought about the woman she had been a year and a half ago, broken, lost, crying into cereal in a tiny London flat. That woman couldn't have imagined this. The husband who looked at her like she had hung the moon, the daughter who had his intensity and her stubbornness, the family that had grown to include sarcastic assistants and dramatic hotel managers and a therapist who still didn't understand his own metaphors. She had walked into the wrong support group and found exactly where she belonged. "What are you thinking about?" Lorenzo asked, catching her expression. "How grateful I am," Charlotte said, "that I can't read flyers properly." He laughed, the sound warm and free, and pulled her close with his free arm. Isabella gurgled between them, already falling asleep against her father's chest. "To happy accidents," Lorenzo said. "To chaos," Charlotte agreed. "To love," they said together. And somewhere in the evening breeze, Rosa Benedetti smiled, content that her beloved monastery had witnessed one more beautiful beginning. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.